On the first day I stepped into that office, I never imagined that something so unexpected, so confusing, and so emotionally heavy would unfold in my life. I had always heard stories about workplace boundaries, about how professionalism can be shaken by a single moment, a single gesture, or a single misunderstanding. But I never thought I would be standing inside a story like that myself. I was the new guy in the department, quiet, focused, trying to prove myself, trying to find my place among people who had been working there for years. I didn't know that one person, one older woman who carried herself with confidence and experience, would change the way I looked at the workplace forever. Her presence was impossible to ignore. She wasn't loud, but she had a way of entering a room that made everyone notice. People respected her, joked with her, trusted her. She had this mix of authority and warmth that made her feel like the kind of person who could guide you, mentor you, or make you feel instantly comfortable. At first, I even admired her. She started with small things, little moments that felt harmless. A friendly pat on the back when I completed my first report, a light touch on my arm when she walked past me, a playful nudge during a conversation. I told myself it meant nothing. Some people are naturally expressive. Some people communicate with gestures. Some people treat coworkers like family. But then something changed. The touches became more noticeable, more frequent, more deliberate. A hand that lingered on my shoulder longer than it should. A touch on my arm that happened even when there was no real reason for contact. And slowly, without warning, I found myself overthinking every interaction with her. Was I imagining it? Was I misreading normal behavior? Was I overreacting because I was new and unsure? Or was there something else happening, something I didn't want to admit? The thing about workplace discomfort is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, like a whisper turning into a storm. I didn't want to accuse anyone. I didn't want to misunderstand her intentions. And honestly, a part of me felt guilty even questioning her actions, because she had helped me so much in the first few weeks. She taught me things other coworkers didn't bother explaining. She praised my work in meetings. She made me feel like I belonged. But every time her hand brushed against me, that feeling of belonging was replaced by a knot in my stomach. It was confusing, because she didn't say anything inappropriate. She didn't cross any verbal boundaries. It was only physical contact, but contact that felt wrong, contact that felt unnecessary, contact that made me feel trapped inside my own thoughts. The moment everything shifted happened on a random Tuesday. The office was quieter than usual. Half the team was working remotely, and the other half seemed lost in their screens. She came to my desk to review a project draft. I was standing beside my chair holding a notebook when she stepped closer, closer than she ever had. Her hand slid along my arm in a way that made every nerve in my body freeze. And instead of stepping back, she stayed there, close enough that I couldn't pretend it was accidental. That was the moment when my confusion turned into certainty. I didn't imagine it. I didn't misunderstand it. Something was happening, and I didn't know what to do about it. I went home that day with a heaviness I couldn't explain to anyone, not to my friends, not to my family, and definitely not to my coworkers. How do you talk about something like that without sounding dramatic, without feeling embarrassed, without worrying that people won't believe you because you're a guy and she's an older woman? Society doesn't teach men how to talk about uncomfortable situations like this. It teaches them to laugh it off, to feel flattered, to stay silent. But I wasn't laughing. I wasn't flattered. I was confused, bothered, and unsure of how to move forward. That night I kept replaying the moment in my head, the closeness, the silence, the way she looked at me afterward, as if waiting for a reaction. And the more I replayed it, the more I realized I couldn't keep ignoring it. I needed to understand what was happening, and more importantly, I needed to understand myself. Why was I afraid to speak up? Why did I feel pressure to tolerate something that made me uncomfortable? Why was I scared that telling someone might make me look weak or overreactive? It was in that moment that I realized this wasn't just about her actions. It was about my silence, my fear, my hesitation, and the emotional storm building inside me. The next morning I walked into the office with a strange mixture of alertness and hesitation. Everything looked the same, the desks, the buzzing lights, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the break room, but something inside me felt different. Every sound felt louder, every step heavier, every glance more meaningful than it should have been. I kept wondering whether she would act like nothing had happened, or whether the moment from yesterday meant something more to her than I wanted to believe. I sat at my desk pretending to be busy, typing meaningless words into a document, just to avoid thinking about the possibility of seeing her walk toward me again. But of course, avoiding someone who works 10 steps away from you is nearly impossible. I heard her voice before I saw her, calm and confident as always. She was talking to another colleague, laughing lightly, sounding completely normal. For a moment I questioned myself all over again. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the moment I replayed in my head 100 times wasn't as serious as it felt. Maybe I was exaggerating it because I was new and anxious. But then she walked toward me, and the way she smiled, soft, knowing, almost too comfortable, made the knot in my stomach return instantly. She asked me for a file, something she could have easily asked through email, but she chose to come to my desk instead. She stood close, too close again, her hand brushing mine as she took the document. This time it didn't feel like an accident at all. This time I saw a glimpse in her eyes, something almost playful, something that made my breath tighten. I stepped back slightly, hoping she would take the hint, but she didn't move away. Instead, she leaned a little forward, as if she enjoyed watching me become uncomfortable. That was the first moment I felt a chill, not fear of her, but fear of what this situation could turn into if I didn't stop pretending nothing was wrong. The rest of the day I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting into a loop of questions. Should I talk to her? Should I talk to HR? Should I ignore it and hope it stops? Should I explain to her politely that the touching made me uncomfortable? But every option felt complicated. She was respected in the office. She had been there for years. People trusted her voice. And I was still just the new guy, the one who hadn't fully earned his place yet. I worried about being judged. I worried about being misunderstood. I worried about my job. And beneath all of that, I worried about putting a spotlight on something I wished had never happened in the first place. That afternoon, something happened that pushed me even closer to the edge. I was in the supply room grabbing printer paper, a small space where the shelves almost touched both sides of the wall. As I picked up the stack, the door opened behind me, and before I could even turn fully, she stepped inside. The room instantly felt smaller, the air thicker. She stood behind me in a way that made my heartbeat accelerate, not because I was attracted, but because I felt cornered. She reached around me to grab a folder from the top shelf, brushing against my arm again, far more than necessary. I stepped aside quickly, pretending to look for something else just to create space. But she didn't move away. Instead, she let her hand rest lightly on my back for a moment. That felt too long. I froze. My skin felt hot where she touched me. My mind raced with 100 thoughts, but my mouth couldn't form a single word. She finally stepped back, as if nothing unusual had happened. She told me to take my time, smiled, and walked out of the room with the same calm confidence she always had. As soon as she left, I leaned against the shelf and tried to breathe. The moment wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and it was enough to break the last bit of denial I had been holding on to. I left the supply room feeling shaky, frustrated and tired, not physically but emotionally. I wasn't angry at her, at least not yet. I was angry at myself for letting it continue without saying a word. I was angry at my silence. I was angry that I didn't know how to defend my space without making things worse. That night I sat in my room thinking deeply about everything. I thought about how society expects men to always be strong, always be comfortable, always be unaffected by things like this. But I wasn't unaffected. I was confused and mentally drained. I thought about how many men probably go through similar situations but never talk about them because they fear being judged or laughed at. And suddenly I couldn't help but wonder how many stories like mine stay unspoken, hidden behind forced smiles and awkward laughter. It was in that moment I realized that staying quiet wouldn't protect me. It would only allow the situation to grow. The next morning I woke up determined to set boundaries without escalating things. I didn't want to accuse her or turn the workplace into a battlefield. I just wanted my space back. I wanted to feel comfortable walking into the office again. I rehearsed lines in my head the entire commute. How do you tell someone to stop touching you without sounding rude? How do you express discomfort without hurting their feelings or making accusations? I walked into the building repeating the same sentence over and over. I appreciate your support, but physical contact makes me uncomfortable. It sounded simple, clear, respectful, but I still didn't know if I'd have the courage to say it. What I didn't expect was that the moment would come earlier than I thought. She approached me before a meeting, placing her hand on my shoulder again, and before I could overthink it, the words came out, quiet, trembling slightly but honest. I told her I needed a little more personal space, that the touching made me uncomfortable, that I hoped she understood. For a moment she looked surprised, almost taken aback. Then she smiled politely, nodded slowly, and said she understood completely. But something in her eyes shifted, something colder, something unreadable. That change in her eyes would become the beginning of a new chapter in the story, one I didn't see coming. The next few days felt strangely quiet, like the air between us had shifted into something colder, heavier, and much harder to ignore. She no longer touched me, not even accidentally, but her silence followed me everywhere. Before, she would greet me in the mornings with a warm smile, ask about my work, or offer advice on projects. Now she barely looked in my direction. Her friendliness had vanished, replaced by a distant professionalism that felt completely different from how she had treated me before. But the most unsettling part wasn't her silence. It was the feeling that something invisible had changed in the entire office. A few coworkers who used to talk to me casually now exchanged polite nods instead. I caught whispers as I walked past,
conversations that suddenly stopped the moment I entered the room. I didn't know whether it was my imagination or something she had said, but the shift was impossible to ignore. It was as if a quiet tension had settled into the walls. I didn't want drama, and I had been careful, respectful, and gentle when I set my boundary. I didn't accuse her. I didn't complain to anyone. I didn't make it public. All I did was speak up for my own comfort. But even that small act seemed to ripple through the office in ways I hadn't predicted. For the first time, I realized how much power she held there. Not just in her position, but in the respect people had for her. She wasn't just another coworker. She was someone people listened to, someone people trusted, someone whose opinions carried weight. And I was the newcomer who had unknowingly stepped into her shadow. Even then, I tried to stay calm and focus on work. I told myself the silence would fade. I told myself people would forget whatever she might have implied. I told myself everything would eventually settle. But the real turning point came one afternoon during a team review. We were gathered around the conference table, discussing a project I had worked hard on. When it was my turn to explain my progress, she interrupted, not harshly, not directly, but subtly enough to make my work seem less significant. She pointed out minor issues that could have easily been ignored. She questioned decisions that had already been approved. She spoke in a tone that made it sound like I hadn't fully thought things through. It wasn't obvious to everyone else, but to me it felt like a quiet punishment, a reminder, a way to show who had control in that space. I tried to stay composed, but inside something cracked a little. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. I had never wanted conflict with her. I had simply wanted her to respect my boundaries. But now it felt like my honesty had cost me something I couldn't get back. The sense of ease I once had walking into the office. And yet, even in the middle of that tension, a strange clarity began forming inside me. For the first time, I wasn't scared of the situation anymore. I was tired. Tired of the confusion, the pressure, the feeling of being trapped between my silence and her actions. Tired enough to finally acknowledge that this wasn't just about a touch or a moment. This was about respect, boundaries, and emotional well-being. That evening, I stayed in the office longer than usual. Most people had already left. The sky outside had darkened, and the soft hum of the air conditioner filled the empty space. I sat at my desk staring at my reflection in the black screen of my computer monitor. I saw someone different from the person who had walked into this job months ago. Someone who had learned how hard it can be to speak up. Someone who had learned that even simple boundaries can come with consequences. Someone who had grown. And I realized then that silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the moment you're forced to confront the truth. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to expose her or escalate things. What I wanted was peace. Peace of mind. Peace in my workspace. Peace in my own thoughts. So I made a decision to talk to HR. Not to accuse her, not to create a scandal, but to document the situation quietly. I explained everything calmly, respectfully, clearly. I told them I didn't want action taken unless it became necessary. I just needed the situation understood. They listened carefully, asked questions, and assured me my comfort mattered. For the first time in months, I felt heard. I felt like I had taken control of my own story. When she found out I had spoken to HR, she didn't confront me. She didn't lash out. She didn't speak a single word about it. Instead, she became strictly professional. No friendliness, no subtle gestures, no hidden tension. Just quiet, neutral, formal behavior. And strangely, that neutrality brought a sense of relief. It wasn't warm, but it was safe. It wasn't comfortable, but it was stable. And I finally felt like the invisible pressure around me had lifted. Weeks passed, and the situation slowly faded into the background. People stopped whispering, the tension eased, and I learned something important, not about her, but about myself. I learned that discomfort must never be ignored. I learned that boundaries are not rude, they are necessary. I learned that respect goes both ways, no matter the age, the position, or the power dynamic. And most importantly, I learned that speaking up for yourself is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. Looking back, I don't hate her, I don't blame her. People are complicated. Situations are complicated. Intentions are not always clear. But what she taught me, perhaps without meaning to, is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Your voice matters. Your comfort matters. And your boundaries deserve to be protected. And if someone watching this video is going through something similar, feeling confused, uncomfortable, or unsure, remember this: you're not alone, and you're not overreacting. You deserve respect. You deserve safety. And your story deserves to be heard. If this story touched you, taught you something, or made you feel understood, please don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear this, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories, guidance, and powerful content. Your support means everything.